gospel tells us it was early, and it was still so very dark that morning when Mary Magdalene approached the tomb. I imagine her waking up with eyes swollen from crying herself to sleep again. I imagine her grief so heavy it was almost paralyzing. I imagine the sound of rain falling hard. The first day and the second day had passed like a blur, but this third day since Jesus had been crucified, she awoke with the awful sound of that crowd, of that hammer echoing in her head. I imagine her tossing and turning, trying to quiet the images in her mind, trying to go back to sleep, but sleep would not come. It was useless. The darkness, the pain was just too overwhelming. Her tears began to flow once again. I imagine she finally got out of bed and she began to pace the floor, walking back and forth into a night that seemed cruel and endless. We've all had nights like this, haven't we? When sleep was impossible, when the darkness seemed to linger, and the grief and the loneliness, the fear, the worry shakes and rattles us to the core. It was early, so very early. Hours before the sun would even think about coming up, and I imagine Mary pacing in her home until she couldn't pace any longer. And she grabbed her coat and she walked out into the darkness of the night. And the rain fell ever so softly down her hair, masking her tears. The wind chilled her to the bone, and the darkness seemed to consume her every thought, her every step. And the darkness drew her toward the grave. I imagine she must have thought that being there would make him feel closer. It would somehow bring her some solace, some peace. So down the dark, shadowy road to the tomb she went. As memories of better days washed over her, she remembered. She remembered the stories of Jesus's birth, how the shepherds danced and the angels sang. She remembered the stories of how Joseph taught young Jesus how to hold a hammer and carve a toy boat. She remembered the look on Andrew's face as he watched a lunch pail that never came up empty. Enough fish and bread to feed thousands. She remembered wedding guests who enjoyed wine made out of water. Oh, and that time when Jesus walked through the waves and the storm as though he were walking down the street. I imagine in the deep darkness, Mary thought about the blind man, how Jesus healed him with spit and mud. And when the man's eyes opened for the first time, he looked around at everything, the trees and the flowers and the sky, at all the colors, yellow, red, and orange, and green, and at least a million others. She remembered the celebrations, the last coin, the last sheep, the father scrubbing the smell of pig off his son's back, a day's wage paid to workers who had worked only an hour, a Samaritan helping a badly beaten man to his feet. While it was still so early and so very dark, no moonlight, no stars, only the ghostly memories of something, of someone that was gone forever. And though her eyes were wide open, in her grief, she could see nothing but darkness ahead of her. I imagine another miracle was the last thing that Mary expected. As she approached the tomb, she hadn't yet noticed that the rain had stopped, that the wind had stilled, and she couldn't yet comprehend what she was seeing. The stone was moved and the tomb was empty. Empty. How could this be? It was impossible. She was horrified. And she ran to tell Peter and another disciple they had taken the Lord out of the tomb, and I do not know where they have put him. Back and forth they ran, looking for the missing body. Eventually, Mary, so worn and so exhausted and so bewildered, found herself standing alone again. And she took off her coat and she sat down outside that dark, empty tomb. I imagine it was all just too much to bear. As the tears fell, she took a deep, long breath, and with all the strength she could muster, she looked inside the tomb, trying to understand what was going on. And when she looked, she saw a couple of angelic beings standing in the place where Jesus was supposed to be. And they asked her, "Why are you crying?" And through her tears, she sputtered, "They have taken my Lord." And then she saw another man whom she assumed was the gardener, and he too asked her, "Why are you crying?" I imagine Mary must have been annoyed by this question. What do you mean? Wasn't it obvious? Can't you see? Wasn't it bad enough that Jesus had been crucified, that Jesus was dead? But now his body was gone too. Someone had taken it. Can't you see that? I imagine all Mary wanted to do was to find her Lord so he could be at rest, at peace. He deserved that at least, didn't he? But no one knew where he was. Frustrated, she cried again, "They have taken my Lord." Aren't you listening? And with that, the first hint of dawn could be seen. The sun rising through the black night sky. And Mary finally noticed that it wasn't raining anymore. And the gardener looked at her and said, "Mary."
When it rains, it pours, but you didn't even notice. It ain't raining anymore. It's hard to breathe when all you know is the struggle of staying above the rising waterline. Well, the sky is finally opened The rain and wind stop blowing, but you're stuck out in the same old storm again. You hold tight to your umbrella. Well, darling, I'm just trying to tell ya that there's always been a rainbow hanging over your head. If you could see what I see, you'd be blinded by the colors, yellow, red, and orange and green, and at least a million others. So tie up the boat, take off your coat, and take a look around. 'Cause the sky is finally opened, the rain and wind stopped blowing, but you're stuck out in the same old storm again. You hold tight to your umbrella. Well, darling, I'm just trying to tell ya that there's always been a rainbow hanging over your head. Oh, tie up the boat, take off your coat, and take a look around. Everything is alright now, 'cause the sky is finally opened, the rain and wind stopped blowing, but you're stuck out in the same old storm again. Let go of your umbrella, 'cause darling, I'm just trying to tell ya that there's always been a rainbow hanging over your head. Yeah, there's always been a rainbow hanging over your head. It'll all be alright.